Welcome back to Sunday Vibes, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, we are at the Phoenix, just off of Oxford Circus. Joining me today for a classic episode of SV is Patrick Van Straten and Doogie Critchley. Joe Tomlinson is in Barcelona at the moment. Actually, I think he's flown back today. However, he's got the day off. He's going to be at Doogie's quiz later on.
Not interested.
Patrice, how's your week been? How you doing?
It's been good. It's been a good week, Zach. I had a nice Easter. That's it.
Any Easter eggs eaten?
Yeah, Easter eggs eaten, chocolate given to the baby.
Oh, yeah.
A successful time all around. She's just getting into chocolate, so we did an Easter egg hunt and she found chocolate buttons, and now she can say chocolate button, which is a problem.
Doogie, can you say chocolate buttons?
I can. Yeah, chocolate button. Yeah, no, I had a nice Easter as well. Actually, my mum's broken her leg, so we were mainly looking after her, which was a little bit challenging. But yeah, shout out mum, she's on the mend.
Good. Shout out to Doogie's mum for sure. Okay, as you can see by the title of this video, we are going to be looking at the biggest flops of the season. Not just in the Premier League, there might be a few names as well outside of arguably the best division in the world.
Goodness
me. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Now, beforehand, I kind of said all of us to try and pick 3 names each that we want to bring to the table. And then at the end, we're going to decide who is the biggest flop
Definitive.
of this season. It's a big title to have. Not many players want to have it. However, somebody by the end of this video will be called the biggest flop of the season. And so, Patrick, do you want to kick things off?
I do. When you said that this was going to be the title of the video, I was like straight in with the guy I wanted, Anthony. Got to talk about him. I actually think weirdly, I'm sure United fans are going to disagree with this, but I think he's weirdly not got that much stick. I think United fans, will defend him and they're like, he's actually great for our ball retention. And people just laugh at him because he does stupid dribbles on the sideline and stupid skills, and he's useless in every way. But he's actually great, and we're really glad we signed him for 95 million euros. They paid superstar money for him. He's not that young. He's 22, so you'd expect that next year or the year after he needs to explode, because if he doesn't, he won't. That's basically it. And this season has been bad. There's no other way of looking at it. He's got 12 goal involvements in all competitions this season, and 4 of those for Ajax before he moved to United. He scored in his first 3 Premier League games for United, hasn't scored since, hasn't assisted. That's quite bad. He's on 0.33 expected goals and assists per 90, which that may not mean a lot to people, but I'd say 0.4 is really the floor of what you want from a forward. Fred is higher than that. And it's not like Fred's played 2 games. Fred has played 1,000 minutes. So these are all kind of worrying signs. There's part of the scouting when he was signed, I think, has shown to be right. As in, it was he's got this one zone he likes to shoot from, right? Which is the edge of the box, kind of up in that corner. And I think he genuinely is an above average finisher from there. So I think he probably will tend to overperform his XG a little bit because he's obviously really developed that shot. But I don't really see what he adds to United's game apart from this. There are plenty of players who don't score and assist that much, but you can at least see what they're doing. When Jack Grealish is still not prolific for Manchester City, but he drives the team on. He does create chances. He lifts pressure on the side. He's a really important player in build-up. Is Anthony that?
Well, one of my biggest worries with Anthony as well is when you kind of mentioned there, he doesn't really have, and apart from that shot, there's not much else that you're witnessing him do for Manchester United. He's not necessarily creative. He's not necessarily beating lots of players. And I think you've started to see that as well with kind of Ten Hag's team selection, right? I think, and I do wonder, because I actually think if you look at the signings that they've made this season, majority of them have been pretty good. Martinez, obviously, it's going to be interesting depending on that injury that he has. Hopefully it's not what it seems to be of an 8-month outing, because that is obviously really, really bad. Casemiro, I think, has been fantastic when he's not been on the sidelines for a red card. Christian Eriksen has been really good. Wout Weghorst, I mean, it's a loan. It is what it is for 6 months. But Anthony, I guess it's weird because it kind of stopped the conversation about Jadon Sancho this season, about how he had to have this year of coming forward, and obviously he had that year of settling in, and this was his season. He went obviously onto the bench and hasn't really featured as much. And then Anthony came on and has taken most of the headlines. And I do think you're right. He doesn't really get as much stick for someone that has that kind of fee, especially when you think about Jack Grealish last season when they won the Premier League and it was the £100 million man. And every week people were saying that, oh, he's not worth £100 million. He's not doing £100 million worth of output for Man City.
And actually he was doing just the same amount last season. Like there's been a big kind of push towards, oh, Grealish is so important this season. His numbers across the board are the same or worse than they were last year. I think it was just that last year people thought he was being signed as a left winger. He was coming off a season where he'd had, I think, 15, 16 goal involvements for Aston Villa. It was kind of right, he's going to play off the left, he's going to get goals and assists. And instead, and I wrote about this recently, I think Guardiola wanted to use him much more as a kind of Iniesta type. He wanted him to dribble through the midfield to knit things together. Well, this season, it feels like everyone's adjusted to that different role for Grealish. And now they're kind of like, oh, he's actually really good at it. And you're like, yeah, he was good at it last year too.
Yeah. Do you not feel as well that I feel like when I watch Grealish, he does seem more settled though.
Oh, sure.
Like he feels like he's comfortable. He feels like he deserves to be there. Like last year, I feel like he had this weight on his shoulders of being like, okay, I'm at Man City now. Like I've got to be fighting.
Got to change my style to them.
Yeah, exactly. And also like I'm battling with Riyad Mahrez, I'm battling with Bernardo Silva, so on and so forth. Foden. Whereas this year, it kind of feels like when you watch him, and he's got such a great connection with Erling Haaland as well. Up top, you see it all the time. It does feel like that kind of pressure is lifted, which is great to see.
I also think Ake keeps it quite simple on the left-hand side as well. He often just like plays it straight to Grealish, lets him do his thing, whereas João Cancelo comes into different zones and it didn't seem as fluid there. But going back to Anthony, I feel like, maybe he'll get more settled in the country, don't know what's going on off the pitch, but he doesn't have the raw ingredients that make me think he's ever going to explode in the Premier League. Like he's just not very quick, which is a massive issue, I think.
Because he's not strong.
Being quick can cover up like a multitude of ills, and he's not very fast. Neither is Sancho. But you feel like Sancho, has had longer to adapt and is probably just a better technician, in my opinion, particularly in tight spaces. But Anthony, I just can't see him ever being worth that amount of money. And last year, even the Dutch, pundits that I occasionally listen to would be like, look, this is a guy that saves his best for European competition. He was particularly good in the Champions League. I think this year he's actually had some good games in the Europa League, but there's just not been the consistency in the Premier League that you'd want at all, other than that really fast start that he had. So it is slightly worrying for Anthony. I totally agree with Pat. I think he's got a lot to thank Marcus Rashford for, as do a lot of those forwards. Like if Marcus Rashford hadn't had this unbelievable season, they'd all be under so much more pressure.
Yeah, I actually do remember when he first signed, you saying like, to be fair, I think a lot of people kind of agree that the fee was astronomical.
It was about double,
and a lot of and like Ajax got their money's worth for him. I think that is a good shout, Anthony. I think he's a high contender, possibly, for the biggest flop. I want to bring somebody from West Ham to the table.
Which one?
It's a good point, well made. Now, I think when we got into this season, obviously West Ham last year had a really impressive campaign, especially all things considered. And I think the one thing we've always kind of said about David Moyes is the second he gets players that are maybe of a higher quality, we tend to see them not perform well under him. And when, obviously, the guy I'm looking at is Scamacca, who they brought in from Sassuolo, came off a season of scoring 16 goals. Obviously, a very physical 6'5" monster. And to be fair, I will say as well, Joe Tomlinson from the off did call it. He did say he didn't think he would perform in the Premier League. But
that's his shout for everybody who comes from a foreign league. he's just like, it's going to be crap. He's going to be crap. He's going to like Cremonese merchant or whatever, like
Sasso what?
It's always stuff like that.
Sassas or whatever concoction he makes up. But when I started this, I kind of went with the idea of he's been really poor, and West Ham been really poor in general. And actually, after kind of looking into West Ham's season, I've kind of come away from it being like, you know what, like David Moyes is making a real kind of go of things here. And when I was looking at how the fan bases, especially the West Ham fan base, was looking at things, they were more so frustrated with David Moyes' management rather than Scamacca's kind of performances on the pitch. Like, let's be honest, they've not been really good, because for a guy that you spent 30 million quid on, could rise to 35 million, and who's on £100,000 a week, he's got 3 goals in the Premier League. And 3 goals in the conference as well. And that's not really enough, especially when Antonio is still outperforming him and just doesn't look comfortable in this side. But why I mentioned David Moyes is because what a lot of people seem to be saying is he is just stuck in his ways, and he's apparently so adamant of having this 3-man midfield where really for what the way they're playing their football, the way things are going, and the way that their strikers, Danny Ings, who they also brought in, and Scamacca, enjoyed playing with other people up top around them. Scamacca was in a 4-3-3 at Sassuolo. Obviously, Danny Ings has seen his best football probably come in a 2 when he's at Southampton and even at Aston Villa. And at West Ham, they're not playing that at all. Like, the striker is so alone up top. Now, can Scamacca have done better? Sure. But he has had a lot of fitness issues as well. Yeah. There's been a lot of injuries every single time. Like, I think there's a couple of quotes I've got here, which are kind of tough just to find in a bunch of words. But where from David Moyes and the fitness staff being like, every time he kind of comes back, there's always another issue, or he struggled to finally kind of get his minutes. He joined late as well, didn't have a proper pre-season. So I kind of come away from it thinking like, actually, like, he's not maybe been as bad as, or the reason he's been so bad has kind of a lot of reasons behind it. And so I felt a little bit harsh kind of then being like, he's the biggest flop, whereas actually in general it kind of seems like David Moyes is having a big effect, because if you look at all the strikers this season at West Ham, none of them are succeeding, even when they brought in Danny Ings this summer. I mean, I don't know if
January,
in January. I don't know if you watched loads of him when he was in Italy, but do you feel like he's the same player now?
I mean, he had an exceptional year last year, but he did massively overperform his expected goals. I think he got about 16 goals, and I think he was actually at 11 on XG, and he scored some absolute stunning long-range efforts for Sassuolo. I seem to remember just week after week of like outrageous goals from outside the box, which, you know, is not always going to translate to the Premier League. I think he actually did all right in his first few Conference League games, and it felt like, you know, he's starting to find his feet a bit. But yeah, it's been difficult for him. I still think there's a player in there for sure. I don't think they've necessarily targeted the wrong players, but for whatever reason, whether it's squad harmony, just the cohesion of the squad, key players losing a little bit of form, like I don't think Declan Rice has been quite as good as last year. Jared Bowen hasn't been quite as good as last year. Their two main players from last year really, you know, have taken a step back. So West Ham are still in and amongst it. Obviously, that win over Fulham last weekend feels like they are gonna sort of move away now, and they've actually got really good goal difference as well, which is quite crucial, despite that thrashing at the hands of Newcastle the other day. So I'd be really surprised if West Ham went down, but it's been a miserable season.
I just think the issue is David Moyes. I really do. I think what we might see is not David Moyes go during the season, but I think maybe come the end of the season we might see because if you look at David Moyes' strikers since he's been at West Ham, apart from Antonio, who, fair play, he's really got it this season less so, but last season especially. But when Sabala was there, it didn't work out. Like, I think the second he gets these strikers who are maybe a bit more specialist in what they do, and of a higher quality, he kind of seems to struggle with managing that. Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, West Ham fans just in general just can't get over the fact he keeps playing 3 midfield apparently. But
they should just hire Hasenhüttl. That's what they should do.
It'd be a fantastic hire in the summer.
No, but truly, like, I just think I don't know why Leicester didn't go for him, though I think probably they made their move too late anyway. Like, he's just a good manager. He was a good manager in the Premier League. I think you give him some better talent, you can absolutely see how West Ham could fit their talent into a Hasenhüttl system. And I agree, like, this is the thing with Moyes. I'm reluctant to blame Moyes for it, because I think Moyes did such a good job to get them to this point. Yeah. But yeah, it's like you can add talent and improve a Moyes side, and then after a certain point, it doesn't matter how much talent you add, there'll still be a Moyes side. I think they've been unlucky this season, but if there's a managerial upgrade, and there is, then you should do it.
Interesting. Well, we'll see come the summer. Doogie, we're heading over to your side for one of your shouts.
Yeah, so I've done a couple actually from Serie A. I knew we'd mainly focus on the Premier League, so I wanted to throw in a couple of others. And I think Paul Pogba deserves a mention, to be honest. It's a little bit harsh because, look, he's been injured for the vast majority of the season. I think before last night when he came on against Sporting CP, he played 35 minutes all season long. Pretty horrendous stuff. He arrived with a knee injury, and supposedly the medical staff at Juventus were like, look, have surgery, and he was like, no, I'm going to hold off, I'm going to do it, you know, other methods, etc. And by September he started running again, and then was like, oh no, I need to have surgery. So had surgery because he didn't want to have surgery, so he was going to miss the World Cup. Then he missed the World Cup because he'd waited 6 weeks. If he'd done it in the summer, he probably wouldn't have. So it felt like he was almost prioritising France ahead of Juventus.
This just feels like Paul Pogba's career in general.
I know, it's so unfortunate because I think he missed 20 games last year. I think he missed 16 the year before. He hasn't played over 1,900 league minutes since 2018-19, which which is a long time ago now. And that was that season. He was phenomenal for Man United in the Premier League. I think it was 13 goals, 9 assists. And people just, always wrote off that season as, that was Pogba at his best and what he could really deliver. And finally looking like that player that, United thought they were going to get. But this move back to Juventus, people say it's a free signing. Can it really be a flop? I mean, the guy took a massive pay cut to start with. I think he was on 15 million euros. He dropped down to 8 with add-ons. But that is still the most expensive or best paid player in Serie A, which is quite a statement given that it's Vlahovic, Osimhen, Dybala. And crucially, they refused to offer Dybala a new deal and use that money to sign Pogba. And Dybala's been sensational for Roma this year. I think he's got 15 goals, 7 assists, has just played with this sort of fury of a guy that knows that, as sad as he was to leave Juventus, he's got an amazing opportunity at another big side, and he's just played like a sort of jilted star all season and just played with a lot of anger and almost resentment, like fueling his play. But Pogba, miserable, to be honest. Came back, played 20 minutes against Torino, played a few minutes, I think it was against Roma, and then was taking free kicks in training and injured himself. Was out for another 3 weeks. Came back last night, played about 6 minutes then. Also missed a team dinner, so he got fined, and then he got injured the next day. So it's all just been an absolute disaster, really. And Juve needed him to really hit the ground running because their two most creative players last season were actually Morata and Dybala, both of whom left the club. And no one was operating close to 0.3 expected assists per 90, that sort of ratio which you see as a really nice level. I think there was only Morata who was above that last year, and even Dybala was below 0.25. So they really needed some creativity. And Di Maria's come in, he's had his injury issues, but when he's been fit, he's been really good. Chiesa's had problems, so there's just been a real lack of creativity in that side. And actually, Allegri's done a really good job to make them pretty competitive this year, given that. And he has blooded a lot of young players. They're looking to overturn that 15-point deduction as well, and if they do, they'll still be the second or third best side in Serie A this year, which, given where they were at the start of the season, how they flopped in Europe, is quite an achievement. But for Pogba to be on that sort of money, he's turning 30. He's almost had 2 wasted seasons now, because last year he couldn't really play at all either. And it just feels like, once again, his career is just sort of meandering down to a pretty sorry conclusion.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the fact that they should have used that money on Dybala potentially, brought in Pogba, and he's just not been able to play. I think he's got to be up there for flop.
I think out of all the play, every footballer ever, he might have one of the most kind of disappointing downfalls, because at his peak, even in his early Juve days, he was this exceptional, unique midfielder that it was 1 in a million, really. He was so impressive to watch, was like a real entertainer as well on the pitch, but had every single element you could want in a footballer in his position. And just to see how it's gone, is such a shame. And partially that is due to injuries. Maybe it's also due to some decisions that happen, even just moving back to Manchester United. But I do always whenever someone mentions Paul Pogba, it's one of the biggest what if careers. What
even
could
some
have been.
Performances at United, he was absolutely exceptional.
The World Cup,
The World Cup, he was absolutely brilliant. He's in that sort of Ozil category of player of what if, constantly thinking of that slightly sharp decline, really. But I hope he gets back to full fitness and proves Juventus right for spending this money. But on this season alone, it's just been terrible.
He is one of the contenders. We'll make our last decision later on in the show. Patrick, back over to you with a suggestion. We've got a couple here. You've got a Tottenham Hotspur player. You've also got a Wolves on loan player.
Yeah, which is a bit of a victory lap. I'll go for Perisic, because I think Perisic is quite an interesting one. So going the other way to Pogba, this was a guy who was meant to, rather than this being an opportunity to resuscitate his career, this was a guy that Conte was bringing in because he was like, I've worked with him before. He's a winner. He's got a great mentality. He's going to give us some depth, at the kind of left wing back / left forward position. And it's so funny that he went and got this guy who's 33 years old. Yeah, we're not paying really a fee for him, but we are going to pay him 180k a week for 2 years. Something like that, supposedly, with bonuses. And then when Conte was on his way out, his whole thing was, well, we don't have the right mentality here. Nobody wants to play under pressure. And you kind of think, well, Romero just won the World Cup. Bentancur won titles with Juventus. Perisic won a title with Inter, with you very recently. Nobody ever accuses Kane and Son of having a bad mentality. Kane's apparently a great leader of men, despite the fact the team he leads is pretty weak. Mentally, I don't really understand it. So it's and Lloris is obviously a World Cup winner as well. So you kind of look at this lineup and you're like, these guys are too like mentally weak. Well, wasn't Perisic brought in for exactly this reason? Now, obviously, it's not as bad as some of these other moves because it wasn't as wasteful financially, and he hasn't been terrible. He's got 7 goal involvements in 28 league appearances, but I think the kind of proof of the lack of faith in Perisic ultimately was the fact they went out in January and they were like, right, we're going to get a left winger and we're going to get like a really kind of more attacking right wing back. I don't think they'd have had to do that if Perisic had been really, really good. It just seems to me like last summer, the whole attitude around Spurs was they've won the transfer window. And yeah, you heard that from some guys who don't know what they're talking about. You know, like Jamie O'Hara, like people who will just always say the pro Spurs thing, you know. But you also heard it from like quite a lot of outlets. Like it was widely discussed. And I still think moves like Bissouma, you know, getting Kulusevski like on a permanent transfer, Richarlison, I still back all those moves really. I still think they were all kind of fine and they've been a bit unlucky with Richarlison and Bissouma.
We'll get on to.
Sure. But yeah, with Perisic, the whole point was this is a known quantity. And I also think that it shows you the fundamental mistake at the heart of this Spurs side over the last couple of years, which has been we've got 2 world-class strikers, 2 world-class attackers. They're getting older, so we've got to like get a bunch of guys who are peak age and can contribute now because we've got to win something now. We've got to win something before Son declines. We've got to win something before Kane declines. And Perisic was part of that. It was actually a big investment. 180k a week is not to be sniffed at. And it just hasn't worked out. And the manager's gone and now they're on another manager hunt. And who knows what they'll end up with. The whole point of this was we are going to try and win a trophy. Well, they're not going to win a trophy this season. They could potentially win a Carabao Cup or maybe an FA Cup next season. But I think we all think that's like the best they could possibly do. It's just been a total failure. And I do think that people never want to sell their best players, and I get that, but sometimes you don't sell your best players and then they have a massive decline, and then you've got a guy who's earning a ton of money on your books while your team gets worse and you can't really sign anyone to replace them. And now, who kind of knows what Spurs would look like if Kane took a step back next year if he doesn't go? Or if the only teams who come in for Kane in the summer, they're not willing to go above kind of 60, 70 mil, which would not be unreasonable for a 29-year-old with a history of ankle issues. So I just kind of think this was a mistake that is kind of emblematic of the things that have gone wrong at Spurs over the last 5 years. And it's just funny that they were like, we've won the window. It's another great move for Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah. Their next appointment is massive as well. It's going to be so interesting about what sort of stylistic manager they sign. Like their squad is actually quite well suited to 5 at the back now in terms of their wing backs. Like, I don't think Perisic could play as a left back. Don't think he's got the pace probably to play as a left winger. They brought in Pedro Porro, who's a right wing back. They got Destiny Udogie signing this summer, who is a left wing back as well. You know, Emerson Royale, I don't know where he really fits into that whole thing, but he feels more suited to having somewhere to cover behind him. So, yeah, I think their squad is pretty well set for a 5 at the back manager, but that style really hasn't got the best out of them this season. And maybe that's down to Conte, maybe the fact it's down to the fact he's been ill himself, the fact he's lost some close friends, or maybe it's just down to the fact that his mentality and the team that he created hasn't carried out or been able to carry out what he wanted, but maybe the messaging just wasn't good enough as well. They barely put together a 90-minute performance all season. They competed so hard to get in the Champions League last year, and they were terrible against Milan over 2 legs in the last 16, and they missed a massive opportunity to go deep in that competition.
Well, you mentioned the team they're putting together. One of the guys that I wanted to bring to the table, you mentioned as well, was Richarlison. And I do agree in terms of the long-term future of Richarlison at Spurs, pretty good. It could be pretty good. I think this is a player who's already scored 48 Premier League goals in his career, 22 assists. But when they signed him, I do sit there and wonder about what they told him was going to happen this season. Because I don't understand how he would have sat there, and obviously he wanted to move away from Everton, a side that he probably could have saw was going to be struggling again this season, to a side that was going to be in the top half of the table and battling for the Champions League. I understand that side of things every day of the week. But they have Kulusevski, they've got Harry Kane, they've got Heung-min Son. Heung-min Son has just come off a season where he was ridiculous. Harry Kane's come off another season where he's ridiculous. And Kulusevski looks frightening down that right wing. And Richarlison's 2 positions that he favours the most is down the middle and off that left flank. That's what we saw him thrive at Everton. And I don't understand how they would have explained the situation to him where he would have happily gone, I will be a bench option for this season, because that's not how his attitude has been. You've seen that him coming out in the press conference this season when he said, "Oh, my season's been," and then had that whole Barney with Conte about
being lied to,
and then being put on the bench. So maybe he was legitimately lied to, and that's why he joined, and that's why things went pretty wrong. However, they spent £60 million on a player that hasn't scored a goal this season.
In the Premier League.
In the Premier League, sure. It is also tough as well because he hasn't had that many minutes. He's had 749 minutes, which is just over about 8 full games if you add them all together. But things, I don't know. I just don't get the thinking. I think that's what you kind of goes hand in hand with what you were saying about Spurs in general. This whole idea of nobody really knows what's going on, or maybe they did just think, you know what, Antonio Conte is going to be that guy, and they just thought he was going to commit to them. And then midway through their season, they went, oh, the football we're playing is really dire, and the way we're playing football is really bad, and our supporters hate it. Especially because that's the one thing with Tottenham Hotspur where I think although they might not have won trophies or whatever, I think the fans have at least somewhat enjoyed the football they've played.
Sure.
And they've liked going to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and watching them play nice football. I on the weekend was lucky enough to go to the Spurs-Brighton game. Oh my God.
They got battered.
Brighton, if you're a Brighton fan, I can completely understand how you were so frustrated.
They should have won that game like 3-1.
Easily. Like Spurs were lucky. They would have been lucky to get a point out of it. The fact they got all 3 is crazy.
Yeah.
But the football that Spurs are playing, there isn't.
Yeah.
It's not football. It's just kind of get the ball to Harry Kane and hope for the best and see what happens. And to be fair, other teams have done that same kind of tactic. Chelsea used to do that with Eden Hazard in his last season, especially under Sarri. But at the moment, like I think that's why you can see such frustration with the fans at Spurs, because it's just not going. There's nothing to cheer for at the very least. Like they're not playing nice football. And then in terms of Richarlison, like I just think, as I said, his future, I think it could work out, especially with obviously you mentioned Harry Kane and Son getting older now. There will be a place in that squad. But for this season, spending £60 million on a player that hasn't scored a Premier League goal probably does quantify to being somewhat.
Yeah, he's got to be in the list. I mean, I can understand why he wanted to go to Spurs. You know, he's excelled for really quite bad Premier League clubs quite consistently. I think he was really good at Everton, really good at Watford before that as well. But you know, he backs himself. I mean, he's Brazil's number 9.
Yeah.
You know, he probably thought he'd get more game time, but it just feels like there's been such a disconnect from even the start of last summer over who Fabio Paratici wanted, over who the club wanted, over who Conte wanted. You know, his statements around Jed Spence, his statements around Basuma is basically as soon as he arrived being like, he's not ready for our system. The fact he hasn't used Arnaut Danjuma at all since signing on loan in January, that was a player that was excelling for Villarreal last term. The minutes that Richarlison's got in the Premier League, I think there's so much other stuff going on at Spurs. To call Richarlison the flop of the season, I think would be a little bit harsh. But on numbers alone, he deserves to be in the conversation.
I just think as well, the money, like Spurs, one of the things we said was like Spurs need a quality centre-back, like an elite centre-back, right? They spent 60 million on Richarlison and not played him. And so why didn't you take that money and go and put it towards getting...
They did get Longley on loan, which I think was kind of okay. Like, I mean, the thing is, Richarlison couldn't really have asked for like a better situation as well, in that if he'd come in, you're never going to unseat Kane.
For sure.
You're never going to knock Kane out of the lineup.
For sure.
And if Son had played like Son last year, then you'd say, fair enough, like you don't get rid of him. But actually, Son's played badly, and Richarlison still couldn't kind of get himself into the lineup. Kulusevski's been injured a lot of the time, and Richarlison still couldn't get himself into the lineup. And yes, part of that has been his own fitness. But at the same time, like, a star on the wane is a guy whose place you should feasibly be able to take. And he still hasn't managed to make himself a starter. Like, that is a little bit disappointing. Because, yeah, if everybody was firing, I could understand him sitting on the bench, but they're not. So what does that say about you?
Very true. Okay, let's move on to the elephant in the room, Chelsea Football Club. Because when we were doing this, we were looking through the transfers, and there were a couple of players that we could have mentioned. I mean, down here we've got Cucurella as kind of the main guy, but if we're being honest, there were quite a few names that probably could have came in. Raheem Sterling hasn't obviously hit the season, taken to the season very well. Todd Bailey. Graham Potter, I guess, is a signing. Yeah, for sure. That didn't necessarily go too well.
Frank, how's that going?
We're 2 games in. That one.
You lost both of them.
Yeah, you never know. Stamford Bridge on the Champions League night can change.
He's so
wow.
bad.
We got Brighton on the weekend as well, and I'm petrified. I'm going to it.
Brighton, then Real Madrid.
At Stamford Bridge.
And you got then Brentford, I think, after that. It's a tough
Oh
one.
my God, what a horrible run.
Once this video is out,
And then us,
the
then
Brighton
us,
game would
then,
have
yeah.
happened, and that we'll win that one.
Yeah, you probably will win that one. If you're going to win one of them, it will be that one, yeah.
So look, he's Cucurella, the fifth most expensive transfer of the past year. Obviously, Fofana came in for more. Mudryk came in for more. Enzo Fernandez came in for more. Sorry, he's the fourth most expensive. At
That's
60,
crazy.
That's only the fourth, yeah.
£62 million.
Yeah.
Tiggy.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's a bad player, to be honest. I don't think it was necessarily the wrong pickup from Brighton. It's good to have depth in that position. We saw when Chilwell was injured last year that you were really undermined in that. But you haven't really played him in his best position. And I just think he's had his confidence knocked, really. I will say that he has put in the occasional very good performance. I thought he was excellent against Dortmund in the second leg. Along with Koulibaly.
Spurs in like his second game.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
Like,
I mean, again,
unreal.
Koulibaly was very good in that game as well, but they both struggled with their confidence. Cucurella less with his fitness, but Koulibaly's had a lot of injury issues. But yeah, I think it was clearly an overpay. I think the fee was absolutely ridiculous, to be honest. It was at least £25 million too much. But having said that, there were other clubs interested in him. Man City were interested in him. Man City don't generally target duds. He deserved to be going or in the conversation for a move to a top six club on his form for Brighton last year. I mean, it wasn't long ago that he was at Getafe, etc., and then Barcelona jettisoned as well. So he'd done well to turn his career around. But I just think he's looked a bit timid, really, and he's played a fair amount of his football as a left-sided centre-back, and I just think there was better left-sided centre-backs available last summer.
It's a lot of money for someone that is quite a conservative fullback, right?
For sure.
Like, if you went and splashed out £60 million for someone like Hakimi, you'd be like, oh, okay, I get it. This is a guy that really helps out in going forward, so on and so forth. Whereas that was never really...
Well, yeah, he's not really a flying
game,
fullback,
was
is he? He's a retainer of possession. He can make nice incisive passes, but he's not particularly quick, or at least he doesn't stretch his legs very often. I think was it one assist he got last year for Brighton?
Yeah.
Like, he's not really a bomb down, get to the byline kind of guy. Completely different from Chilwell, which is actually quite helpful to have two different profiles in your squad. But I think if you just wanted a better left-sided centre-back, why didn't you sign Badiashile last summer?
Very true. Yeah, very true. But to be fair...
Easy to say in hindsight, but...
Yeah. And obviously, like, I think the other side of things, like, is just so much goes on behind the scenes that we'll never see. And when a new ownership comes over like this, that don't have a director of football, don't have any of these things in place, like, it probably is like somebody at Chelsea being like, this guy's been really good, or like, who had a good season last year that we're looking at. We're trying. Obviously, Alonso's left, Emerson has left. Like, we need to get a left back in who was good last year. It wouldn't shock me if maybe that was literally the discussion that happened, and someone went, Cucurella was alright, and then that's what started the whole talking about Graham Potter, so on and so forth.
Then they discovered Brighton as a club.
Yeah. I think we sat here when I think it was more so when Thomas Tuchel got sacked and Graham Potter came in charge. I think there was four of it. It was when we did the 4-person Sunday Vibe shoot. We kind of sat there and said, look, Cucurella, we all agreed was an overspend. I think we all kind of sat there as if it was more of like I think it was like 35 million Man City pulled out at?
Yeah,
like 40 million.
It shot up
like
pretty
that.
fast, yeah.
And I think we were all like, that fee seems really reasonable. Like, that's absolutely fine. Whereas, making the most expensive fullback in the world is probably an overspend, and we've definitely seen that. As for some of the other guys at Chelsea, like Koulibaly, you mentioned him. He's had, again, good games and some poor games.
Playing well against Real Madrid the other night.
He was. Yeah, it's probably actually Fofana who was having the tough game. But then again, when you're playing against Vinicius Junior, when aren't you going to have a tough game? I think Enzo Fernandez has probably settled decently in the Premier League since he's been here. Mudryk, we spent £100 million on. Hasn't really featured that often, which is quite shocking, to be honest. I remember sitting here
one more time, though.
and being like, when we were discussing, no, for sure. But I remember sitting here and talking about him possibly going to Chelsea or Arsenal. I was like, well, at least the benefit if you go to Chelsea is you got a chance of starting week in, week out. Like, the wingers at Chelsea weren't performing. And he hasn't at all. But I think
looked bright in his first couple of games.
He did. I mean, when he came on against Liverpool, he looked super exciting. I just think he's really raw. And like, again, this is a guy who's come from obviously Ukraine, where so much is going on, and obviously his family is still there. There's so much behind the scenes that we'll never kind of be privy to.
Hadn't played a lot of football in the preceding months as well. Outside the Champions
and like,
League.
I think what would be really beneficial is, like, hopefully once the manager is sorted and having a pre, like, I can't put the words. I think a pre-season with a manager that is set and they can find out how they want to play. Because that's what I felt like the whole time over the past couple of months is just got no idea of how these boys are meant to be playing their football at all. And it's like 1 minute they're getting told to do this thing with Thomas Tuchel, next they're being told it's to do this with Graham Potter. Then there's a World Cup in the middle of it. Like there's just been no time.
And no consistent partners as well.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If you're playing on one side and you have no idea who the centre back is, the left back is, like, how can you build those relationships? How can you know where they're going to be so that you can move into another area that complements it?
I think one of the ones that I thought would actually have gone a bit better, really, even if this season was like it was Raheem Sterling. I thought Sterling was someone who
experienced head, amazing Premier League record.
Yeah, exactly, and someone who was pretty good in front of goal. I mean, partially, the creativity at Chelsea isn't amazing, and that was never really his role at Man City, to be the creative force. He was more at times meant to be put it in the back of the net, and so to come into Chelsea and then be tasked with doing that creative side is quite a big ask, I think. But still, I thought he might have settled in. I mean, he did get that injury as well, and obviously there was stuff that happened at the World Cup where he had to go home, so on and so forth. But I did think maybe we'd see a little bit more from him. But I think in general the team and the season's just been such a mess where I think it's possibly kind of harsh to single out.
He's also going from a side where Pep Guardiola has them coached within an inch of their life. They're like automatisms of where to move, when to drop off, when to hold on to the ball, when to pass. It's just second nature. Whereas Chelsea, as you say, it's just been a mess.
Yeah.
Tactically and off the pitch.
But, no, very true. Yeah, I think it's also very different. Like Graham Potter's style, I think was quite different to, as you mentioned, Pep's. Be here at this moment and wait for this trigger. Okay, well that's Chelsea done. Again, I'm sure we'll talk about them plenty throughout the season. We're coming back to you, Patrice, for Guedes.
Yeah, well,
this is a good shout.
Well, this was one of those things where in the summer, I remember Wolves fans getting very excited about their window, and I wasn't that impressed by it, to be honest. I thought they paid absolute top dollar for Nunes, which does tend to happen when you buy players out of the Portuguese league, but they also paid top dollar for Gonçalo Guedes, and I don't really understand it. He's had a bad few years, and he's been playing for a bad side. He had a decent campaign the year before, but overperforming his underlying numbers quite a bit. So that's not a situation where you go out and spend over 30 million on a player, but that is what they did. And Wolves have money, sure, but they can't really afford to get attacking signings wrong because their attack has been bad for a while. Now, they got unlucky this year with Kalajdzic getting injured. Jimenez.
I've not thought about that guy for months. Wow.
Yeah, well, he just got, he got an injury literally day one, right? And then
you can't write that stuff as well. That's
and
tough.
Jimenez has taken a big step back. Neto hasn't come back strong.
Then got Diego Costa in, who we all knew was.
But they had to do something.
Yeah.
Podence has been okay, but I just sort of look at them and think there are lots of interesting parts to this side, and they did improve after Lopetegui came in, but fundamentally they needed a really great attacker who was going to kind of bridge the gap between them being a really bad attacking side and a passable one, because the defense is always fine, but the attack has been so horrible all season. The only team who've scored fewer league goals than them is Everton. They've scored 24 goals. It's absolutely shocking, except for the fact that that's kind of what you expect from them at this point. Yeah. And Guedes, they spent a huge amount of money on him. They got, I think, 1 goal, 1 assist out of him in 13 appearances. And after that big fee, they sent him on loan to Benfica in January, where now he'll, be playing the Champions League quarterfinal and he'll win the league.
He's not really playing, though.
Well, no, why would he? Yeah. But he's depth for a side that is in the latter stages of the Champions League and is going to win the league. It's just such an early stage to be like, this guy is not for us. And I thought it just reminded me of, Villa a few years ago when they went on that huge transfer spree and they signed like Vesely and all those kind of guys. And they were like, this is an amazing window. We are showing, at the time Leicester and Spurs and Arsenal, like how it's done. We're like doing all the best transfer work out of any side outside the top 6. Any side be happy to sign these players. And you think, spending £25 million on a player doesn't guarantee you're getting a £25 million player. And similarly, spending 30 million on Guedes doesn't guarantee that you're getting a £30 million player. And they haven't. And I think it was completely predictable. Like, looking at the numbers, it was completely predictable it would be this bad. But the fact they've given up on him in January is like a kind of double embarrassment for them. So I just think it's an absolute state. And Nunes as well. You know, there's talk that he could go in the summer.
Liverpool,
I don't see it.
I don't really get it.
To be totally honest, I think he's one of the biggest overpays of the summer on his performances so far.
Nunes.
Yeah. I know he's had a good last couple of weeks. He's got a great goal against Chelsea.
He started the season really well.
Started the season really well, but he's drifted. And I think it's difficult in that Wolves side. He's been moved around a lot, and he hasn't probably played in the positions that he'd want to. He's played out wide as well.
Sure.
But I'd expect so much more. And I think apparently he's been told that he can leave if they get a certain fee for him. And it looks like his performances have really kicked into gear.
That's mental, because also the fee they're talking about seems to be basically what they
say. Same, yeah. It's going to be £5-10 million more.
And every time you criticise him, everybody comes out with the same thing, which is they're like, one time Pep Guardiola said that he was one of the best players in the world. And you're like, Pep Guardiola says all sorts of shit all the time. He said Foden was the best player he'd ever seen. And Foden's a great player, but he's not better than Messi.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
But Pep does it all the time.
He says this stuff constantly.
You know when
he always says Burnley are a great side after slapping them 5-0.
It's always,
He's
exactly.
like,
He does that every
wow,
time.
Crystal Palace.
Yeah. And then when he loses to a team,
Like you would not believe.
Yeah.
What
He does it all the
what
time,
they're doing there. It's incredible.
Yeah, he wins 4-0 and starts complimenting, and then he loses 1-0 and goes, "They're awful. How did we lose to them?" So
I like it though. He's very respectful, but he does sometimes talk total BS.
Yeah, and especially in this case, like nobody, not even people related to Matheus Nunes, think that he's one of the best players in the world. He's not even one of the best in the league in his position. No. Like he's just a guy. Like, and I think there's definitely ability there, but these are signings you can't afford to get wrong when you've got other parts of the team sort of aging, and when the relegation battle is as congested as it is, to the extent that a couple of bad results could push you into it. And make no mistake, like Wolves aren't going to get relegated, but they're 4 points above the relegation zone right now after having had supposedly a great tear, post World Cup. They're still only 4 points away from relegation. So I think that there are parts of the team you can be optimistic about. I don't think Neto will be this bad forever. I think that the centre-back pairing is actually
really
quite
nice.
positive.
Really nice.
And even guys like Aït-Nouri, I really like guys like that. But I do look at that squad and I think you had 30 mil to spend on an attacker. And, you look at someone like Dongo Ouattara, who's been, he's been wasteful for Bournemouth. If he'd finished his chances, they'd actually have more points even than they do. But he has been really good for them.
Really
and if they just got a couple of guys like that, like some cheap gambles, and one of them had paid off, then they'd be in a much better position. But instead, are they going to try and shift him in the summer? I don't know.
All depends if George Mendes is their agent, to be honest. I feel like that's how a lot of Wolves transfers work.
You can't even just put him on a plane to China like you used to be able to. You can take him on a holiday to Turkey and leave him there. But it's hard to shift a guy you spent 30 million on a year ago, and I guarantee as well he's on decent wages. He's probably on 80k or something.
And one of the overperformers from last season was the goalkeeper
Jose
Sarr. And this season, I think, it's kind of just been back to like normal.
Regular,
Exactly. Okay, I like it. Talking about Pep Guardiola and players that he loves, I want to talk about a player he called fat and overweight. Calvin Phillips.
Oh yeah, that was the kind of
what
mad
a segue.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, came back from the World Cup, and Pep Guardiola said that he was overweight.
Sorry, so he's saying he got fat at the World Cup,
supposedly, because he did he
Too much lamb
the World
kofta.
Cup. I think he didn't come on, or maybe he might have played.
I think he might have played a couple of minutes.
It's tough for Calvin Phillips
but
because
you're at the World Cup.
he's enjoying himself.
Just train hard.
I'll tell you what, there was
weeks.
I had a lot of shawarma out there. It's understandable.
It's tasty.
I think I put on a couple of pounds. I won't lie. Okay, but yeah, look, Calvin Phillips. Bottom line, he's played 65 Premier League minutes all season. And that is stinking, and that's over 6 substitute appearances. Keep in mind, before this, the least amount of Premier League minutes he ever played was just under 1,600, and it's understandable. I think Calvin Phillips always knew that going to Man City, he was never going to be the starter straight away. But this is a guy that was England's Player of the Year, who at the Euros was really, really impressive next to Declan Rice. And to be fair, look, when someone like Jude Bellingham comes through and you've had loads of injuries, it's tough, and with the way Southgate wants to play, you might be the guy that's going to be dropped. But the big thing for him has been these injuries. He joined Man City. I think he played a couple of minutes, and then they were like, "Look, we need to sort out this shoulder injury." And a little bit like your Paul Pogba situation, he then went and had surgery, missed I think it was something like 11 games or so through injury. Then obviously came back, but then the World Cup happened straight away. Got called up to the World Cup. Went with England to Qatar, but has never really managed to come back and put a foot into this side. And again, it's super difficult when Gundogan is playing to the level he's playing and Rodri's playing to the level
Well, he's competing against the best defensive midfielder in the world.
He really is. He really is. And so it's completely understandable. But when Man City are paying over £40 million for you, and again, look, Man City can afford that. That is understandable. I just wonder for himself, like, I think like no player really goes to a club thinking I'm just going to be the bench option, especially when you've just had the season that you've had, and as I said, you've won England Player of the Year. Like Calvin Phillips must have thought like I'm going to get into this Seaside, or at the very least play more than
games,
65 minutes at the very least. And so I just think in general, like he's had a real drop off. Like that's not for a guy who's now 27 and was being looked at by other clubs too. He's at the prime age now. He's at the prime age for the next couple of seasons. He might be sitting there and hoping, okay, Gundogan might be leaving at the end of the season. Maybe that's my entrance in. But then really we're seeing talks about Jude Bellingham
to Gundogan
coming.
as well.
He is, exactly. He's much more defensive. Like the guy he really is going to be stepping in for is Rodri.
Yeah.
And with the way Rodri's playing at the moment, it's just not going to be happening. And Rodri and him are basically the same age profile. Like it's not that, okay, Rodri's going to become 33 next year and they're going to have to start thinking about the next guy. Like he has been brought in. And look, from a Man City point of view, having Calvin Phillips as your backup DM is not a bad thing at all. Like from a squad depth, it's great. But from a Calvin Phillips point of view, you're not featuring. Like I was seeing rumours that like Aston Villa and West Ham are trying to look into buying you.
I'd go. I'd 100% go because Rodri's also just made of granite. The guy never gets injured. It's an insane injury record, and he's a phenomenal player. But it's so difficult, as you say. Like Pep Guardiola calls you and says, "I want you to join my club." He left his boyhood club for Man City. It's pretty much the dream as a footballer,
and probably a decent wage increase
as well.
A
big wage increase, etc. It's not necessary that he made. Well, he obviously did make the wrong call in hindsight, but you can understand why he made that call. It must be so persuasive, Pep Guardiola saying, look, you're a fantastic player, I want you at my club.
And he might get a season as a starter. Like we said the same thing about Nathan Ake. We were like, this guy went to City for big money. He's never going to play. And now this season, he's pretty much never present. And they could still win the league. They could win the Champions League. So it isn't impossible that at some point Rodri gets a contact injury or something, and you do get a run of Phillips inside. Or
do you not think it's damning though that like there's been times John Stones has been the one to step into midfield for City?
But he's such a unique role because he's often playing at right back as well, out of possession. And that is the good thing about his future at Man City, is the fact that Pep Guardiola is always tinkering. There's always some new tactical innovation. Like he changes it from a month-to-month basis, season to season. You never know what he's going to be doing. So there might be a time in the future where he plays two DMs. Maybe if he,
like a 4-2-4.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe if Gundogan leaves this summer, De Bruyne's not getting any younger. The issue with replacing Gundogan is Gundogan's that master of what they call pausa, like the tempo setter, and Phillips, that's just not his game at all. So he's not a natural fit as a Gundogan replacement. But maybe there'll be some tactical innovation that he gets in the side for.
Wouldn't shock you as well if like Pep's has spent this season in the training ground like building him into being this like to change his style of play. And again, look, these are the flops of the season. We're not sitting here saying they can't become better in the future. Turn it around. That is by no means what we're saying. Okay, Dukes, we're going to go to Europe for your one. He's been in the headlines over the past couple of days, but you think he's been a flop this season?
Yeah, I mean, he has been for the money they paid. This is Charles de Ketelaere at AC Milan. Look, was wanted by a lot of clubs last summer. Leeds, Leicester, Everton, wanted to join Milan, Scudetto champions, back in the Champions League. And they needed someone who could cover at 10, who could play on the right wing. And he'd also played some games up front for Club Brugge as well. And look, he put together a great season last year for Club Brugge. I think he got 14 goals and 7 assists in the league. That's really impressive stuff. His Champions League form wasn't as good. I think he got 1 assist in 6 games. But at the same time, they're in a group with PSG, Man City and RB Leipzig. It was a ridiculous group. So yeah, he didn't excel in that. But it wasn't necessarily the wrong option from Milan. But he's just not trusted by Pioli at all. And he's slightly unfortunate. And Brahim Diaz has really turned it on in the last couple of weeks. Just as it looks like, well, I think his loan is coming to the end of it, the 2-year loan. He's going back to Real Madrid. There's reports that they want to offer him a new long-term deal, Real Madrid. Personally, I don't really get that because he doesn't feel like a natural fit for a 4-3-3. He's much more of a natural 10. But De Ketelaere, excelled at Bruges last season. There's been other players from Bruges who were bought last year or in the years before that have done really well. It's not necessarily a bad place to buy talent. Like Louis Openda went to Lens. He's been magnificent there. Odion Kosunu went to Bayer Leverkusen. He's a really solid centre-back. Before that, players like Arnaud Danjuma came through at Bruges. Like, they've got a really good, solid talent production. And Charles de Ketelaere, they were so excited about what this guy could do. And he's still only 22. And I do think we've been slightly shifted by the Bellinghams, Gavi, Musiala.
The level's been right.
Yeah, and the level's just been, these are players looking like the best in the world at 18.
Yeah.
That's rare. That's really rare. And we should remember that most players, at least 5-6 years ago, really get into their peak around sort of 24, 25, 26, 27. So he's still got plenty of time, but he's just not been at it, really.
I've heard him been called the next Kevin De Bruyne. And maybe that's just the Belgium link, so on and so forth. But it feels like he's a little bit different.
I think he's much more of a final third player as well. Yeah. But he's just been slightly unfortunate. I mean, he's played, I think, 30 League and Champions League games now. He's got 1 assist, no goals. And for that sort of money, 32 million euros, I think that was their 9th highest fee they've ever paid on a player. So the most they've spent on a player since 2019. And they didn't spend a lot of money last year. They only brought in Malik Thiaw and Messias as well, and then De Ketelaere was their big summer expenditure. Milan haven't had a lot of money for a long time really. They've made smart investments in young players, and it still could come off, but he doesn't look like you're ever going to get a return on that investment, at least in his current form. The good thing is his underlying numbers aren't actually as bad. He should be on around 5 goals and assists in the league, according to expected goals and assists, which is half of Brahim Diaz's output in half the minutes. So it's not been terrible, but he's just not in Pioli's thoughts at the moment. Like, I think he's played 13 minutes in their last 3 Champions League games, about 20 minutes in their last 3 league games. And this is a point of the season where you'd be like, look, he's been here for a little while. He's maybe more settled into the city, his lifestyle here, and he's still not getting picked. So it's a little bit concerning. It's definitely one to keep an eye on. I do feel harsh calling in the flop of the season, but I was just looking down the list of the big money signings, and most of them have actually been pretty good last summer, I thought. I mean, Cucurella is the sort of obvious, very expensive one that hasn't paid off. So the guy could come good, but it's been a really disappointing first campaign in Milan.
Well, there we have it. That's the majority of them. One quick one, guys, we've got here. Sadio Mane, we've got written down. Obviously,
in the news.
Especially in the news recently after getting into a little bust-up, supposedly with Leroy Sané. He's now missing the game on the weekend because of this. Also, reports coming out that now Bayern Munich are willing to move him on in the summer. Obviously, he's into his 30s now, not necessarily a guy. I mean, if you're signing him, how much do they spend on him in the summer?
It was like 32.
32. So not terrible, but if you sign him for 32, you end up. To be fair, they're going to look like they're going to win the Bundesliga now, but maybe
it's still tight.
Yeah, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't, and you also move on Lewandowski, and then you sell him the year later. That is quite a fall from grace. I mean, in general, he's got 6 goals and 4 assists, which is not terrible, but 5 other Bayern Munich players have been better or bettered that. I mean, I think there's been it's interesting because you look at the way Liverpool's attack, or not attack, but Liverpool in general since he's moved on, and maybe himself, they've both kind of been bad without each other.
Yeah.
Especially, I think there was a big realisation the first half of this season, at least going forward. I feel like the attack has at least got better in the second half of the season. But the first half of the season, you really did see like what Sadio Mane did for that Liverpool side and that front 3 for Liverpool. But if Bayern Munich do go on to sell him, I think that is something we can probably consider a flop. Any other last-minute names come to mind?
Just a bit more on Mane. I think his role was slightly changing at Liverpool in the last few years. Like, he physically wasn't quite the same player. He was playing a lot more centrally. And I think Bayern were like, look, this is the guy that can replace Lewandowski. He's much more of a Nagelsmann forward than Lewandowski. Like, he likes to drop deeper. He's obviously can pull wide and be more effective there. And that was their main issue between Lewandowski and Nagelsmann. But for Choupo-Moting to outperform you all year, and look, he's had a great season, but it's pretty damning, really. And yes, there's amazing competition on the wings. Coman, Sane, Gnabry, etc. Musiala's are pretty much dead cert to start because of his form this year. Thomas Muller's still delivering. Like, the competition is insane. But I think he's got to be in the conversation. Although I do think, I mean, I said this on Continental Club this week, I think it's, a little bit overblown, this fight with Sane, to be honest. I think this probably happens in the dressing room all the time. And Bayern Munich have one of the leakiest dressing rooms around. It always, the news just comes out of there every single time. And everyone was like, oh, it's Nagelsmann. It's clearly not Nagelsmann. There's someone in there that just leaks information. I think they're too close to the papers. But this sort of stuff happens all the time. He'll be frustrated with this form. He'll be frustrated by the fact he didn't start that game.
Frustrated with Sane.
And frustrated with Sane. Clearly there's some words exchanged, but I just don't think it's a big deal.
To bop him in the mouth is...
Well, apparently it was a slap. But it did bust his
okay.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Hard slap, yeah.
Yeah, but it busted his lip. Although I saw pictures of Sane and his lip doesn't even look that swollen. So, yeah, I think
So get
fine.
over it.
Yeah, get over it. Come on.
Okay, well, there we have it. If you guys at home have any other suggestions, get them in the comments below. I'm sure there's plenty. There's loads that you guys will say. Get them down there in the comment section.
We need to pick our top one.
Oh, goodness. Great shout. Yeah, we do. We need to pick our biggest flop. Our biggest flop.
Some
Okay,
quite
so
good
I'll go through
candidates.
the names that we said, the
Yeah.
names that we brought to the table. Skamaka, who I actually in the end defended, and said it was David Moyes. Calvin Phillips, Richarlison, Anthony, Perisic, Guedes, Cucurella, and Chelsea transfers. Sadio Mane, Di Ketelaere, and Paul Pogba were our suggestions. I'm kind of leaning towards Anthony.
I'm sticking with Anthony.
Really?
But maybe I also could understand if someone says to Chelsea, Cucurella and Chelsea.
Chelsea
maybe in
overall.
Chelsea overall. Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Chelsea overall as a team, and maybe as a player, Anthony.
Yeah.
Oh, it's still.
I mean, Gonzalo
Anthony.
Guedes has been worse than Anthony, but for
Sure.
significantly less money. He's a good shout. Richarlison as well, lots of money, hasn't had the returns, but I think there's quite good context around that. Anthony, yeah, I mean, Anthony's a good shout. Anthony's a very good shout. I mean, just because the money's spent.
There we
Money's
have
spent.
it. There we have it.
Anthony.
FD's biggest flop of the season is Manchester United winger Anthony. Do you guys agree, though? Let us know in the comments below. Again, get your suggestions down there as well. Anthony, good luck next season, mate. You're going to need it. That's for sure. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Sunday Vibes. I think we're going for about an hour, so I've been off the old quick fires and the personals. Quick personal. What are you doing this weekend?
This weekend, I'm hosting a charity pub quiz
Yes,
on
you
Friday.
are.
And then actually, when this video is live, me and Zach will be doing a Tough Mudder on Sunday.
Yes, good luck to
yeah.
us, man.
Pray for us.
Please wish us luck.
Good luck.
Because, to be fair, I think we're going to be okay.
Some of the names of the obstacles do strike a bit of fear in me.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
I don't understand it.
I've never done Tough Mudder before, Deke, so we'll have to see.
Yeah,
But
we'll have
there's
to see.
22 obstacles over 10k, so wish us luck. Pat, what are you doing this weekend?
I've got two second birthday. Yeah, it's your
Yeah.
second birthday. I've got two birthday parties for
Coco's?
two little babies. No, birthday's not till May.
Coco's friends.
Coco's friends. Yeah.
That'd be
Amazing.
wild.
Amazing.
Actually, will be fun.
The difference there is crazy.
We need to
Birthday
grow up.
parties, Tough Mudder.
I wonder who will be more tired after. We'll find out.
I know somebody that will, that's for sure. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Again, get in the comments below. If you want to see more Football Day content, click on screen right now. If you want to suggest next week's Sunday Vibes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram and all of that good stuff. And we'll catch you very soon. Goodbye.